Okay, we've unpacked our Windham MPC, taken everything out of the box. What we're going to do for these tests is we're going to run this gun with the exact magazine that it came with, just for the sake of reliability, figuring if they shipped it with this magazine, they expect this gun to run with this magazine under most conditions, under normal conditions. What we're going to do is, before we start abusing this gun, we're going to run some good federal ammo through it, some brass. We're going to run 5 shots through it to get an idea on accuracy. We want to get just a general idea, because as we go through these torture tests, we're going to test the accuracy of it along the way to make sure we haven't disturbed that any. So we're going to run these 5 rounds through it, and then we're going to start to getting to the abuse. Okay, as you can see, our 5-round group at 25 yards is somewhat within an 1.5 inch grouping. Keep in mind we have a non-expert shooting this gun, myself, hence the 1 round that we'll just say is due to operator error that hit in the red. Again, with my being as blind as a football bat and shooting with iron sights, even at 25 yards is a tremendous challenge for myself. Nevertheless, I'm comfortable enough to say that we have a decent enough grouping at 25 yards to be able to fulfill this test going forward. All right, that was cool. We were able to put 5 rounds downrange out of this Windham Weaponry MPC. Try to say that real fast, Windham Weaponry MPC, with cold lips. It doesn't work real well. Anyway, we're gonna call it the MPC for short until my lips thaw out. We put those 5 rounds downrange just to see how accurate this gun was for future purposes. Whenever we fire this gun after these torture tests, we want to be able to show if it affected the accuracy in any kind of way negatively. So that was the purpose of only putting the 5 rounds downrange. We know the gun is not broken in. Most people out there buying these guns, they're going out there and they're firing out off whatever kind of bullets they can fire off in them, and they're just throwing the guns up. They're not properly breaking them in. If a gun needs to be broken in, that's always up for debate. But that's why we didn't want to run a bunch of good rounds through it today, because we want to start it out like a lot of guys might start it out, going buying some cheap ammo and just running it through there. So that's why we did that today. Only 5 rounds of brass ammo, again, just to get an accuracy idea. Now we're going to start abusing this gun, and we're going to start documenting everything along the way. So the good stuff is yet to come today, which is basically just to introduce everybody to the gun and to introduce ourselves to the gun. And from here on, we're going to start getting nasty with this gun. So we want to kind of get right into the gun bully segment that we've been working on for quite a while now. We have that Windham Weaponry AR-15 in this ice. It's down in here. We're going to bust this thing out of here as our next stage of our, I guess, our diary entry for the gun bully segment that we're doing. This is day 3 so far of this AR-15 frozen in ice. We actually submerged it in ice the first day, got it nice and covered up in there. The temperature actually melted it down a little bit that evening, and then it froze back up down to about 27 degrees that night. Froze solid. Yesterday we busted it out, broke it out a little bit, covered it back up because it warmed up just a hair yesterday, enough to where it would solidify around this thing again. Plus we wanted to get ice inside the weapon also, not just encasing the outside of it. So that was the purpose of trying to melt it back down again before we refroze it again. So today is day 3. We're going to bust it out of here today, take it over to the firing range and fire it once it's safe. Of course, we don't want to have ice in the gas system or in the chamber or anything like that. So we're gonna get the ice out of the weapon and drain it out of there before we shoot it. And when we do shoot it, we're gonna fire it really, really hot. We're gonna run about 100 rounds through it pretty quick to try to go from hot to cold pretty fast. This thing's made out of steel, so don't expect it to do a whole lot. Don't expect it to malfunction. However, just something we wanted to do to see what it does when it goes from extreme cold to extreme hot. Chad, we got a number of things that we're planning on doing to this gun. What's some of the other things we've got in mind for it?
We are going to take this gun, we're going to throw it in a pond for a week or so, let it sit underwater, see how it handles that, sit in the water in the mud, maybe throw it in some sand, cover it in dirt, leave it there for a while, let it get good and gritty, take it out, clean it up, fire it. Maybe let it sit in mud, underneath mud.
Okay.
We got good gumbo mud down in here in Louisiana, so we'll find a
right.
good muddy spot to stick this gun in and let it sit for a little while and see what we can do to it.
Well, that sounds good. I guess what we'll do now is we're going to go ahead and bust this thing out of here. We've got our trusty little pick and hammer that we're going to get it out of here with, and Chad and I are just going to disassemble this ice, bring this thing over there. We don't want to necessarily thaw the gun out, but we don't want any ice in the gas system or the chamber or anything like that. So we have to get it somewhat thawed to a certain degree to get the ice liquefied to get it out of there so we can fire the weapon. So we're going to get started on that. We then took our time to get the block of ice out of the tub that had the AR in it, and then we went to town. Temperatures outside were still in the upper 20s, so it wasn't like we were dealing with a fast thaw here. We actually had to break the weapon out of the ice ourselves. As we got closer to the weapon, we had to slow down and be a little bit more careful about how we chipped away at the ice. We didn't want to damage the weapon itself. Now that we were this close, it was time to take a little bit more care to fine-tune and get the ice off of the weapon.
It.
Being made of steel and polymer, we weren't expecting any damage whatsoever to the finish of the gun. All right, Chad, we got it out. Not sure if you can see this. I'm gonna try to get a close up here. See, it's got ice all in the barrel. It's frozen solid in there. I doubt that this is gonna do any good to try to, yeah, it's frozen solid here. So yeah, I'm not even going to be able to look at the inside the gun in the chamber. We're going to
It's up in the magazine.
yeah, it's got ice all in the magazine well. So we're going to try to get all the ice out of it. Follow those particular pieces of it. And then we'll free this thing up, take it out to the range and shoot it. It didn't take but a second to thaw it out. We haven't done anything to it. We haven't even wiped off the condensation or the sweat from the ice. We definitely haven't oiled it. Remember, we haven't even cleaned this thing yet. We've shot, I think, 125 total rounds through it. 5 original when we got it, just to get an idea of how accurate it was and where it was going to fall, so we have something to compare it to. And then 120 rounds of steel case ammo. So we're going to go ahead and run another 120 rounds of steel case ammo through it today, again without cleaning it, and see how it shoots. The bolt stripped around with no problem, and it was ready to go. We really let this rifle have it. Remember, it was just frozen solid and we just knocked all the ice off of it. We heated this thing up. There was absolutely no rest other than what it took to reload the magazines in between. So this rifle didn't have time to cool off, and we ran these rounds through it fast. Once all the dust had settled, we took a peek inside the ejection port window. Now remember, we've never oiled or cleaned this thing, so that moisture you see inside here, that's actually from the melted ice that was in the cracks and crevices inside the weapon earlier. Other than a little carbon fouling, this thing didn't look all that bad inside. After 3 days frozen in a block of ice, this thing was good to go. The finish still looked just fine. There were tiny spots in remote areas where it looked like a little bit of rust wanted to take shape, but other than that, it was not in bad shape. Now, to show that the rifle's consistency had not changed at this point, the first 5 rounds we ever shot out of this weapon, along with the second 5 rounds that we just shot after 240 steel case rounds, showed that the groupings were all very similar and consistent. Obviously, pinpoint accuracy is not what we're going for here. We're trying to show if the rifle begins to show any signs of inconsistent shooting after all the things that we put the weapon through. Now, thus far, the worst thing we've done to this weapon is not cleaning it and not lubricating it. We have not done either of those things since we purchased this Windham Weaponry MPC AR-15 to run our gun bully tests on. The heating up of the barrel immediately after thawing it out of a block of ice does not seem to have affected the weapon in any way either. Along with that moisture from that melted ice, the weapon fired perfectly. No misfeeds, no misfires. Another 120 rounds through it with absolutely no problem whatsoever. Next up on our Gun Bully segment, the dirty stuff. We're going to submerge this weapon in a pond, leave it there for a week. We're going to bury it in sand, leave it there for a while. We're going to bury it in some mud. We're also going to quote unquote oil it with a mystery substance that a lot of people out there seem to think is good to lubricate a firearm with, and it absolutely is not. Oh, and we're still not cleaning it. All right, Chad, our next installment of the Gun Bully segment is we're going to submerge this AR-15 into this pond out here. Now we're going to lower this thing down in there. We're going to leave it in there for a few hours while we go out here to the range and do some shooting on another weapon. We're going to fire it immediately to see how it fires wet and with the gunk and the mud, and if it even gets gunky or muddy, but don't really expect a whole lot to happen.
Yeah, we've had a lot of requests of doing these little tests for people wanting to see the gun shoot as soon as it comes out. So this is one of the ones we're going to pull it out and shoot it pretty much right away.
So we're going to lower it in there, and then we'll come back, pull it out, fire it at the range. That's good. We summoned our team of all-terrain ballistic submersion experts and quickly set off to put this AR-15 underwater and let it sit there for a few hours. The murky waters of Louisiana typically aren't quite this clear, but it did give us the opportunity to be able to witness the gun lying in the bottom of the pond pretty easily, and gave us the chance to make sure that we moved the gun around a little bit to get all the air bubbles out to allow water to get all the way inside the weapon. Once we'd ensured that we accomplished that, we left it there for a little while and went off and fired some weapons at the range. The weapon was resting peacefully right where we left it underwater. And of course, nothing seemed out of the ordinary for an AR-15 sitting in the bottom of a pond. Now, while rust and corrosion are definitely an issue on the steel parts, obviously the polymer parts and the aluminum parts have no threat of anything going wrong. However, the dirty water and the potential for a little bit of grit in these small working parts was more of a concern when pulling this weapon straight out of the water and firing it immediately, which was what we were exactly going to do here in a second. And this being done without cleaning or lubricating the weapon. Okay, we're pulling this thing out of the water. It's been in the water for a good 2, 3, 4 hours. We know that the water itself, being underwater, is not going to cause a whole lot of damage. We're going to immediately load a dry magazine into this thing and fire it. Todd's going to run it down range real quick, and we're going to show that this thing fires just fine coming straight out of the water. We loaded up more of our steel case ammo and prepared to fire the weapon. And remember, we have not cleaned nor lubricated this weapon. Notice the accumulated condensation being forced out of the ejection port and the tip of the barrel on the first few shots. Here it is in slow-mo. Then we went to town. Once again, not one single malfunction on this Windham Weaponry MPC AR-15. After never cleaning the packing cosmoline off of this weapon, never lubricating it, after freezing it solid for 2.5 days in a block of ice, and after letting it lie in the bottom of a pond for a few hours, nearly 500 steel case rounds fired through this thing and not even a single malfunction. Next up, sand and mud.
Alright guys, Windham Weaponry, mud test. Got a magazine in it, chamber's clear. We taped the muzzle. We want to test the gun. I don't want to test myself. So to keep it safe, we taped the muzzle up, got the dust cover close. We're going to throw it in the mud. Now we'll cover it up.
There's nothing nice about Louisiana mud. It's thick, it's nasty, it sticks to everything, and if you're downwind from it, you might get a nice little pungent stench off of it. Louisiana mud, gumbo mud. We let this Windham Weaponry MPC AR-15 sit in this Louisiana gumbo mud for a good while before we went over to rescue it. All right, guys, we're ready to uncover this thing. We're gonna pull it out of there, make sure we don't have any mud in the barrel, and we're gonna give it a shot. Todd, you wanna see what we can get out of here?
Let's work with it, Paul. It looks kind of nasty.
I sure would hate to hurt this thing.
Yeah.
You know? Oh, that must be it right there. There it is. There we go. Nice.
Chamber around. Got one hang up.
Well, it was the first of many. We went to our super duper crazy ninja slow-mo to see if we could get a better or at least slower look at what was happening with the cycling of this rifle. At first, things seemed to be working just fine. The mud did not seem to be affecting any of the rounds, whether ejecting the spent casing or the new round making its way into the throat of the barrel. It was beginning to look like the duct tape that we had put over the tip of the barrel, for safety reasons of course, along with the magazine being kept in the mag well and the dust cover being closed, had actually done the job. These rounds were being ripped off with no problem. That's 3 so far with absolutely no problem of ejection or feeding of the new round into the throat of the barrel. That is 4 perfectly fired rounds. Looks like we're not going to have many problems with this rifle after all. It appears the Louisiana mud is not that big of a deal. Maybe we overplayed this thing. We sure thought that bolt was going to have more trouble than this cycling backwards with all this mud encased around it. But the dirtier it got, this thing just continued to fire. Did not appear to have any problems. Then it did. Bolt stayed back, did not strip the next round, and if you notice, it's not in the full rearward position. This thing stopped before it went all the way back into the buffer tube. But we were going to get this thing going again.
Jam.
Most of these misfeeds were a classic case of bolt over base malfunctions. A bolt over base malfunction is when the bolt does not go back far enough to clear the round coming up from the magazine from beneath, and basically blocks the round from being stripped and going into the throat of the barrel. In many of these cases, the bolt just jammed rearward and never went forward anyway, but it still didn't go back far enough to allow a round to come up. It was blocking it from the top side. After those first 6 shots were fired, clearly mud had made its way back around and behind the bolt, and most likely into the buffer tube. This was slowing down any legitimate cycling of the bolt going rearward and impacting the buffer tube.
Yeah, it's pretty gritty.
We decided to go ahead and finish out this 30-round magazine with, of course, more of the same. And then we were going to give this thing a mini ditch bath and then go at it again.
She's empty.
You can even hear the dirty metal parts moving against one another.
So what? The second or third one, it ran 2 or 3 through, right?
I got about, I think 3 rounds through it, and then started hanging up. After that, it was pretty much a single shot. But that's some nasty crap.
Tell you what, let's wash this thing off real quick, and I say wash it off. We'll run it through some water, and then we'll slap another mag through it and see what we got.
Let's do it. All right, guys, we got this thing good and muddy. We need to wash it off. Saw we had several malfunctions. It's pretty gritty in there, so looks like a good place as any.
Kids, don't try this at home. If you ever wanted to watch a video on the proper cleaning techniques of an AR-15, this is not it.
All right, we're gonna go hot with it. New magazine, rinse it off in the ditch. Still feels pretty gritty. Let's see what happens.
Looks like not much has changed since our little ditch bath, and I did say ditch bath, but we were determined to make this thing work. But we were going to need a plan B, or maybe even a plan C. Did that one even eject?
Nope.
I know this looks like a whole lot of fun, but it was time to regroup. This was not working out.
Dude. It's gritty.
The ditch bath wasn't good enough. We tried several rounds and we effectively turned it into a single shot rifle. So we're going to run it through the water faucet, rinse it out good, and try it again.
A quick little disclaimer here for all the weekend warriors and keyboard killers out there. We realize there are no water spigots out in the deserts of Afghanistan and Iraq. However, this is Louisiana, and this is just a gun show. Our thinking was that a lot of the mud had made its way back around and behind the bolt, hence the scratching and the gritty noise whenever the bolt goes back or whenever we charge the handle. So we were trying to get some of that gritty mud out of there so that bolt could function a little more properly.
In the bush. This is Louisiana.
Man, that's not real life, man. That's not a water spigot in the Sahara Desert.
Don't really have a prediction how it's going to function, but it seems a little less gritty. Like we got some of that stuff out of there. It's still pretty tight. By no means how you normally run a rifle, but let's see what it does. Obviously the bath that we gave it didn't work, so we rinsed it off under the water faucet. We're going to try it again.
Now, one thing that's important to remember is this rifle has never been cleaned or lubricated. Again, a classic bolt-over base misfeed. By the bolt not going rearward enough, it's trapping that next round from coming up through the magazine. But it is going back just far enough for that spent casing to eject from the ejection port. And even after flushing this thing, the mud and grit inside this thing is jamming that bolt in place and not allowing it to cycle properly. Okay, we were going to get this thing working again. Time for our crack team of experts to huddle around and figure out what the problem is. And remember, folks, this is a rifle that has never been cleaned, never been lubricated, had over 1,000 rounds of steel case ammo run through it, and it's been frozen, and it's been left in a pond for a few hours. Just saying, that's all. This Windham rifle has been a beast, handling everything we've thrown at it. It was time to get right. Okay, that was different. That was a delayed deal.
Mm-hmm. Real sluggish going forward.
But still a positive sign. We still had a feeling things were about to shake loose. Yes! We were so happy we didn't even care that our camera was taking a beating.
Hold up, I'm gonna get you another full mag and we'll burn it up fast.
Okay.
No rest for the wicked.
So like it cleared itself out.
Cole.
This one. Another 30 rounds of steel case coming at you. Sing, baby!
Sweet.
Had a few little hiccups, but it's like it cleared itself out after. And seems to run fine.
Well, since it's running fine, we're not going to clean it. That's how it's going to shoot next time.
Okay.
Of course, the mud had everything to do with it, but I couldn't sleep that night wondering what it was that prevented that bolt from cycling properly. So we decided to break the gun down. Naturally, we didn't want to clean it, and of course, we're not going to lubricate it because that's part of what we're doing here. But by breaking it down, we were going to get a better look at the inside of this weapon, which had never been done before. The bolt and charging handle certainly sounded like it had never been cleaned or lubricated, but overall, it really didn't look that bad. There were, of course, some signs of a little bit heavier wear in some areas, but with the grinding that we were experiencing, shooting that rifle with all that mud in it, we were certainly not surprised to see the wear that we did see. In fact, we were actually surprised that we didn't see more wear. And remember that awful sound of the grinding noises as we engaged that charging handle? It definitely had a lot of signs of wear on top of it in an area that typically doesn't have a whole lot of wear and doesn't get a whole lot of use. And the buffer tube, look, there's not exactly a whole lot of room in this thing for the mud and grime that was being jammed backwards into it by the bolt carrying mud rearward. Overall, this Windham Weaponry MPC rifle looked just fine on the inside, considering no attention had ever been given to this thing from the get-go straight out of the box. It had never been cleaned, it had never been lubricated, and you know the story of the things that have happened to this rifle up to this point. We're going to put it back together dirty and unlubricated and see what it does next time out. More gun bullies coming at you soon from Legally Armed America. You've been paying attention to the gun bully segment that we've been doing with this Windham Weaponry AR-15. We've done tons to this thing. Of course, we've never cleaned it, keep that in mind, but we've never lubricated it. We've thrown it in a pond. We've thrown it in a block of ice, frozen it solid for 3 days, taken it out, fired it when it was cold, and got it hot to where the barrel was smoking. I think last week we threw it in mud. Now, it did kind of malfunction a little bit whenever we threw it in that mud, but let's think about this now. If you go back and look at some of the video clips, we had little pieces of shell, like road shell, that was in that mud. And when we took that gun down, we found some tiny, tiny pieces of shell around that bolt area in the carrier. And that's what I'm pretty sure probably didn't allow that thing to cycle properly. The last thing we want to do with this weapon is we want to simulate similar to what Iraq and Afghanistan's desert would give us in terms of sand. The unfortunate dilemma that we have facing us is that we are in the state of Louisiana. Try finding a desert in the state of Louisiana. That's like trying to find water in the desert. Well, we're gonna, hang on a second. Let's look here. Look at this. Come over here. I think we found some. We found a desert. This is the closest you come to a desert in the state of Louisiana. Now, one thing we did is we've got the dust cover closed, just like they would in the desert, and we have our magazine in. This is how this weapon would be carried. Now, undoubtedly, this is not what our soldiers are doing in Afghanistan. I find it hard to believe that this is how they treat their weapons. This is something that saves their lives. This is probably not happening over there. Obviously, we're taking it to the extreme. So we've got our sand here, our desert in the state of Louisiana. Let's go run this thing and see if it fires. Strip it around okay. Sand's still coming out of it. All right, let's give it a shot. Notice you can still see the sand coming out of all kinds of cracks and crevices from this rifle as it's being fired. Another magazine in it. Seems to fire okay in the sand. As you can see, we're smoking this thing. We're going to try running it again. You can actually smell this barrel. But it did fire okay, and we even let one of our cameramen get some. Mr. Cole Verrett was cranking the rounds off. This Windham Weaponry was rocking like old school heavy metal. It did not miss a beat. All right, now we got this thing going earlier. What we did was, remember we had the magazine in and we had the dust cover closed. This time to simulate, I guess you would consider it another possible real world scenario. We're gonna leave it open and throw sand on it. That's going to obviously encourage some sand to get into some areas that it probably doesn't want to naturally go. But we're going to put some in there anyway. So. All right, let's see if this thing, if that affects it in any kind of way. Naturally, We're gonna see a good bit of sand in there. I have a feeling that that's gonna cause some problems. But let's see what it does. We've already got one chambered. The gun's on safety. Let's see if it fires. Of course this is not Afghanistan, and of course this is not a real desert. This is Louisiana. But clearly sand placed purposely in areas that it's not supposed to go in an AR-15 does not inhibit the functionality of that particular rifle.
No problems.
All right, fellas, as we wind down our gun bully segment here at Legally Owned America, this might seem like a really unlikely spot for us to be inside a house. We just took this thing out to the range, we dumped it in sand, took it out, fired it, no problems. I think we ran a few hundred rounds through it from the range. No problems whatsoever. We've pretty much done everything we can do to this gun without purposely trying to break the gun. We're not going to do a drop test or anything like that because we don't want to damage the gun. It would surely be nice to have this thing in working order at some point once we're done, right? Well, we've got it here in the house after we've done our, let's see, all we've ever shot in this thing is steel case ammo. That's it. Never cleaned it, never lubricated this thing. Pretty obvious if you listen to that grind that this thing has never had a drop of lubricant in it. Hate to do this to a gun, but hey, it's worked fine. But again, we've shot all steel case ammo, never cleaned it, never lubricated it, thrown it in a pond, froze it in a block of ice for a few days, just put it in sand, dropped it in mud. The mud was the only thing that gave it a hiccup, and we went back and looked, and again, like we said earlier, that I think the shell that was in that mud, there were some larger particles of it that got in the back of the bolt carrier and probably jammed it and jarred it loose, or at least slowed it down for that matter. But anyway, we're ready to wrap this thing up. So what are we doing inside? We're going to put this thing in the dishwasher. We're going to give it a cleaning for the very first time, and we're going to do it in a dishwasher. Check this out. Hey, we're legit, and we wanted you, the viewer, to know that we really did run this thing through a cycle of the dishwasher. So we put our GoPro camera inside the dishwasher and prepared to run this thing through. And as you can see, the rifle in its full length put together would not fit. So we had to take this rifle down and lay the upper and lower next to each other in order for it to fit in the dishwasher to run the cycle. Time to get this thing going. Now, I don't know about you, but I, for one, have never seen the inside of a dishwasher before. Now, my sister did see the inside of a dryer before, but that's a whole different story, and there was a pretty stiff punishment that came with that one. And as you can see, our dishwasher is like most of the stupid green energy-saving dishwashers out there today, where it takes a week and a half to actually run a full cycle. So we were going to let it do its thing. The world's first automatic gun washer was in full operation. We'd be back to check on it in a few. All right, we've probably run this thing a lot more than what we needed to. It's still running right now. You know how these new dishwashers are. Not only do they not dry any dishes, but they run forever also. We're going to go ahead and shut this thing down. I think this thing has run through this cycle just enough. So we're going to open it up and see what it looks like inside. There we go. And yes, I'm sure it got fogged up. There is our Windham weaponry MPC AR-15. Wow, and this thing is clean. I might be doing this more often. For the sake of full disclosure, my wife and my son are out of town this week. That's the only reason why I'm able to pull this off without any kind of turmoil. Don't treat your weapons like we treat it here on the Gun Bully segment at Legally Owned America, but we sure had a lot of fun doing it.